Dr. O.C. Abraham is our teacher and mentor who has inspired and taught rational, evidence based practice, especially with the use of antimicrobials. He is widely quoted during our grand rounds and is every student's dream teacher. He did his MD General Medicine from CMC and Masters in Public Health from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He has also done a fellowship in infectious diseases from Wayne State University School of Medicine, Detroit, Michigan. He is passionate about providing comprehensive care to people living with HIV infection and the rational use of antimicrobials.
A very good evening to everybody who has signed in to listen to the MAC this year. Let me begin by saying thank you very much to the organizers, especially Soumya and Sudha. It's indeed an honor and a privilege to be here. I'll be speaking on anticoagulation in COVID-19. Our response to the COVID-19 pandemic can be summed up in 4 phrases. One is knee-jerk reaction, an abrupt, unthinking reaction to some information we are faced with. Second is a shotgun approach, a very broad and not a focused approach at all to managing this pandemic. Third is everything but the kitchen sink. Faced with a deluge of critically ill patients, we got into the habit of everything we have learned about management of ARDS, viral pneumonias, we threw at the patient. And last is the often heard argument that if it can't harm, it will be good for the patient. Classical examples are the story of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. I'll be critically examining the story of anticoagulation for COVID-19 by looking at 4 questions. Number 1, is the incidence of venous thromboembolism significantly different in COVID-19 patients when compared to patients with similar severity of illness? If so, is it thromboembolism or immunothrombosis? Does anticoagulation improve outcomes? And finally, are there harms associated with anticoagulation? First, we will look at the issue of incidence of venous thromboembolism in patients with COVID-19. For this, I will look at this recently published systematic review from Mayo Clinic. They compile all the data, and there's a very large table in the study, in the published manuscript, which you can look up. If you see here, the incidence of venous thromboembolism ranges from 2 to 69%. Immediately it strikes you, why is there such a marked difference? 2 is when patients were subjected to a Doppler ultrasound only if it was clinically indicated. So the clinician suspected venous thromboembolism, therefore ordered diagnostic studies. 69 is when a strategy of screening was adopted. Everybody who came into the ICU had imaging studies to look for evidence of venous thromboembolism. We will look at all these things individually. DVT was 2%, the range being 0 to 5%. Pulmonary embolism 17%, 6 to 33%. Stroke was 2%, 95% confidence intervals 1 to 3%. Acute myocardial infarction was 1%, ranging from 0 to 2%. As I said in the beginning, all are retrospective observational studies, and there is a significant diagnostic bias depending on whether it was a strategy of surveillance or a symptom-directed evaluation was undertaken. And there is considerable heterogeneity in the studies. Some studies included patients in the ICU and in the general medical wards. Some studies were confined to just patients with critical illness who are being mechanically ventilated. What is interesting in this study is that when the diagnostic evaluation, ultrasound, was prompted by symptoms, venous thromboembolism rates were extremely low. Similarly, pulmonary embolism also, a substantial number of the reported was either pulmonary microvascular thrombi or segmental or subsegmental pulmonary thrombosis, which may not be clinically very significant. Not all studies have reported very high incidence of venous thromboembolism. This is from a single center in the USA, Massachusetts General Hospital. As you can see here, if you looked at confirmed VT, that means an imaging confirming the diagnosis of venous thromboembolism, overall the incidence was 4.8%, and if you looked at critically ill patients alone, it was 7.6%. This is confirmed. At the bottom of the diagram on the left-hand side is overall thrombotic complications. Here, whenever the clinician made a diagnosis of a venous thromboembolism, they included them also. So this is subject to a lot of bias, as you know. Very difficult to clinically diagnose venous thromboembolism in a critically ill patient with refractory hypoxemia in the ICU. I would also draw your attention to this thing. Major bleeding complications, 5.6% in critically ill patients. It's still significant. How does this compare to venous thromboembolism other critically ill patients? This is data from a large randomized controlled trial called PROTECT trial, published in 2011 in the New England Journal of Medicine. Here they compared low molecular weight heparin to conventional heparin for prevention of venous thromboembolism in patients admitted to the ICU. So these are all critically ill patients. As you can see here, it was around 8 to 9%. So this is not different from the data I presented from Massachusetts General Hospital. This is all these patients underwent twice weekly routine ultrasonography, Doppler ultrasound for the detection of venous thromboembolism. So it's an active screening process was going on here. So to sum up, number one, there is a wide variation in the reported incidence of venous thromboembolism. But if you look at clinically significant venous thromboembolism, either proximal DVT or major pulmonary embolism, it may not be significantly different from other critically ill patients. And there is also patients who develop significant hemorrhagic complications. Second question is that, is it thromboembolism or immunothrombosis? This has implications in the way we manage these patients. This is a single center study from UK, from Guy's Hospital. They looked at 66 critically ill patients admitted to the ICU. All of them had received dalteparin, most of them prophylactic. If the patient had indications for therapeutic anticoagulation, that means patient had AF or a previously documented DVT or PE, 17% received therapeutic anticoagulation. DVT was present in 9% and all were related to indwelling IV lines. Pulmonary embolism was diagnosed. Imaging confirmed pulmonary embolism in 8%. Out of this, 40% were either segmental or subsegmental. So these are not examples of thromboembolism, deep vein thrombosis leading to pulmonary embolism. This probably means there is immunothrombosis. We now know that diffuse alveolar damage, endothelial damage, and therefore immunothrombosis or thromboinflammation is very common in SARS-CoV-2 severe SARS-CoV-2 infection, similar to other patients with ARDS. Also, there was 7 patients had major bleeding, 4 of them intracranial hemorrhage, 2 pulmonary and 1 retroperitoneal. So this may not be the classical venous thromboembolism what you see in other critically ill patients. Does anticoagulation improve outcomes? This is the most recent and the largest study from Mount Sinai Health System in New York. 4,400 patients, large retrospective cohort. They reviewed the data from the chart to look at incidence of thromboembolic complication and effect of heparin, either prophylactic or therapeutic. Anticoagulation, not heparin. As you can see here, this is the cumulative incidence of mortality. On the horizontal axis, you have time. There was a substantial reduction in mortality in patients given prophylactic and therapeutic anticoagulation. There was no difference between prophylactic and therapeutic anticoagulation. This was about 50% lower than patients not receiving any anticoagulation. This is the risk of intubation on the vertical axis. Horizontal axis, you have time again. Again, here the same story. About 30% reduction in the risk of intubation in patients who received either therapeutic or prophylactic anticoagulation. And there was no significant difference whether the patient received prophylactic or therapeutic anticoagulation. What are the problems with this study? It's a retrospective observational study, and as you know, biases and unmeasured confounding. Even if you use very sophisticated statistical techniques, you can have unmeasured confounding. And this study excluded patients who left the hospital within 24 hours of admission. Patients who received both prophylactic and therapeutic anticoagulation were excluded. So patients had to receive either prophylactic or therapeutic anticoagulation. And they also excluded patients who received anticoagulation for less than 48 hours. So all these can introduce various kinds of bias into your conclusions. Also, to me, the most important outcome of this study was that there was no significant difference in outcomes, whether you used prophylactic or therapeutic anticoagulation. In other words, if you believe the conclusion that anticoagulation reduced mortality and need for intubation, prophylactic anticoagulation was as good as therapeutic anticoagulation. How does anticoagulation fare in otherwise critically ill patients? This is data from pre-COVID days. This is a 2014 Cochrane review, heparin for the prevention of venous thromboembolism in acutely ill medical patients. So they excluded patients with heart failure and stroke because the incidence of venous thromboembolism in these patients is substantially higher when compared to other medically ill patients. As you can see here, non-fatal and fatal pulmonary embolism, there was no statistically significant difference in the incidence with usage of heparin, whether it was conventional heparin or low molecular weight heparin. DVT, there was a 60% reduction in the incidence, and this was a statistically significant difference. All-cause mortality, no difference. There's also a 65% increase in risk of major bleeding when compared to patients who did not receive heparin. So even before the advent of COVID, although we know that DVT and pulmonary embolism, both non-fatal and fatal, is fairly common in acutely ill medical patients, the effect of prophylactic interventions, especially anticoagulant therapy, has not been very great. We know that absolute benefits are small. The number needed to treat is to prevent non-fatal PE can be as high as 769. So you have to treat lots of patients with lots of injections to prevent one episode of DVT or pulmonary embolism. And there is substantial risk associated with heparin therapy, bleeding, heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, more with unfractionated heparin when compared to LMWH, nursing time. Even if you're using LMWH, it's one injection per patient per day, and patient discomfort, the pain, ecchymotic patches formation, etc. And we know that the information you derive from either common sense, good knowledge of the pathophysiology, or clinical observations, observational studies, what is called the real world evidence, does not actually tell you about the true outcomes. Why? We have incomplete understanding of the pathophysiology. Venous thromboembolism in COVID-19 is a classical example. A lot of the thromboembolism you pick up are distal DVT picked up on screening ultrasound, Doppler ultrasound, or pulmonary microvascular thrombosis or segmental or subsegmental thrombosis. We don't know whether it really contributes to patient becoming sick. I mentioned already about the bias and unmeasured confounding in observational studies, even with inverse probability weighted statistical analysis, and incomplete understanding of treatment risk and benefit in a complex system. Remember, these are very ill patients. Most of them who become sick have significant comorbidities. They are from socially deprived backgrounds, and they are admitted to ICUs where people are challenged because of the extremely high workload. We have to ration care. A lot of complexities involved in the care of these patients. So was anticoagulation responsible for the reduced incidence, reduced mortality, and reduced risk of intubation, or something else? We don't know. And medical literature is replete with examples of randomized controlled trials really proving that observational studies have been wrong time and again. Any number of examples. Arrhythmia suppression, acute myocardial infarction, need for radical mastectomy for women with breast cancer. Lot of studies which we know that what we think is based on good sound pathophysiology, when you intervene and you test it, the hypothesis in a randomized controlled trial, we come out flat. So what do I conclude? Number one, clinically significant venous thromboembolism, that is a proximal DVT or a major pulmonary embolism, may not be substantially different from other critically ill patients. I said may not be. We are still learning about it. what is uniform among all the studies, the Mayo Clinic systematic review? Everybody had used, at least the majority of your patients had received some form of anticoagulation. So these patients went on to develop thromboembolic complications despite anticoagulation. So is it lack of anticoagulation or the fact that anticoagulation was not effective in preventing thrombotic complications? So this leads us to the question, is it really thromboembolism or immunothrombosis or thromboinflammation? There, heparin or anticoagulation is not the strategy you adopt to prevent these complications. And the large study from New York showed that there is no significant difference between prophylactic and therapeutic anticoagulation in preventing mortality or the need for intubation, if you believe that these results are true. I would like to quote the corresponding author of this paper, Dr. Valency Fuster, who is the editor of the Journal of American College of Cardiology. He said that he was humbled by the experience in doing this study, and at the end of the study, he has decided to go ahead and test the hypothesis in a randomized controlled trial. So even he does not consider that these are conclusions which you should act on, and it's now can be prescribed as the standard of care. And remember that anticoagulation, especially using heparin, has significant risk: bleeding, heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, which is a very nasty complication to manage, significant nursing time, and patient discomfort. And remember that the widespread usage, adoption of unproven treatment strategies gives us a false sense of security. Classical example is the story of hydroxychloroquine. Because of two individuals, hydroxychloroquine gained widespread popularity despite absolutely no scientific evidence backing its efficacy in patients with COVID-19. And now, after millions and probably billions of dollars, studies across the world, none of the randomized controlled trials have shown that there is any benefit in using hydroxychloroquine. All this energy could have been diverted to studying something much more potentially useful. Next is that it makes sense because these patients are critically ill. If the patient with COVID-19 is hospitalized with either moderate, severe, or critical category, according to the WHO classification, it makes good clinical sense to treat them with thromboprophylaxis. This is in concordance with the existing guidelines on prevention of DVT in medically ill patients. What would I use? I will use low molecular weight heparin if there are no contraindications. Why LMWH in preference to unfractionated heparin? Because it's only a single daily injection. And what are the contraindications? Thrombocytopenia defined as a platelet count less than 50,000. Presence of history of major bleeding in preceding 3 months. Large peptic ulcer hemorrhage, intracerebral hemorrhage, or pre-existing coagulopathies. At the moment, there is absolutely no evidence to support either increased intensity or post-discharge anticoagulation routinely or based on markers like D-dimer. I would like to emphasize the point that D-dimer is only a marker, a biomarker of disease severity in COVID-19. So using it as a target to make decisions on initiate or increase intensity of anticoagulation does not make any sense. So I will conclude there. I'll be happy to answer any questions or comments. Thank you. You ladies.